The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
So over the weekend, President Donald Trump sent out some tweets that were so outrageous, so unhinged and delusional, so indicative of really a total disconnection from the real world, that they make all of his previous tweets and statements seem, quite frankly, not that bad. And of course, you'll realize that that's a contrast that really tells us this new material is just stunning. And before I show you the tweets, I'll remind you that all of this seems to relate to this new book from Michael Wolff. Michael Wolff put out a book just a few days ago about the Trump administration. It's called Fire and Fury. And the book has made Trump and his administration completely panic to try to get it written off as fake news, as lies, as fiction, even though Michael Wolff continues to say that he stands behind the book 100% in terms of accurately publishing what people he interviewed told him. Of course, those people could have been lying, but Michael Wolff is saying, no, this includes completely accurately the interviews that I had with people in and around the Trump administration. And the book is based around several hundred interviews, including, allegedly, as far as Michael Wolff says, an interview with Trump himself. Trump, though, is denying that that interview ever took place. That's sort of a basic fact, right? Either the interview took place or it didn't. And it's very difficult for me to believe that Michael Wolff would just make up the fact that he had an interview with Donald Trump when he didn't. But needless to say, a lot of the material in the book is based around this idea that Trump is just not with it, that he's not competent, that he's experiencing cognitive decline of the type that we often see with various forms of dementia. This includes not recognizing people he's known for a long time, lots of other stuff, and we'll talk more about the details in another segment. But this has clearly rattled Donald Trump so much that Saturday morning over the weekend, Donald Trump sent out a couple of tweets basically making the case that he's both genius-level smart and also very, very stable, the most stable president we've ever had. Not something you really want your leader arguing on the internet, right? Let's go through the tweets, starting with the first one where Trump said, now that Russian collusion, after 1 year of intense study, has been proven to be a total hoax. That's not true. Nothing's been proven to be a hoax about Russian collusion on the American public. The Democrats and their lapdogs, the fake news mainstream media, are taking out the old Ronald Reagan playbook and screaming mental stability and intelligence. Going on to say, in the second tweet, actually, throughout my life, my two greatest assets have been mental stability and being, like, really smart. Crooked Hillary Clinton also played these cards very hard and, as everyone knows, went down in flames. I went from very successful businessman to top TV star to president of the United States on my first try. I think that would qualify as not smart, but genius, and a very stable genius at that. As soon as Saturday morning I woke up and I saw I'm like a smart person, I thought, no, that's got to be a parody, because of course it relates back to the time Trump said that on Fox News Sunday. Remember this?
You are getting the presidential daily brief.
Yes.
Only once a week.
Well, I get it when I need it. I don't have to be told, I'm like a smart person.
I'm like a smart person. I thought for sure that this was satire, but no, Donald Trump again saying I am like a smart person. And of course, I'm really stable, really trust me, does not exactly communicate stability on the behalf of a president, right? When you are the president and you're sending out tweets trying to convince people that you are both mentally smart and stable, you've kind of already lost, right? And the other odd thing is that in his first tweet, Trump said, this is the old Ronald Reagan playbook. Questioning the mental fitness of Trump is like people who questioned Ronald Reagan's mental fitness. We later learned that Reagan had Alzheimer's during the presidency. If this is anything like when people were questioning whether Reagan was fit to serve, that means Trump needs to be removed now.
Yeah, that would be like him trying to defend himself in the Russia probe by saying that the media tried to take down Richard Nixon when it came to Watergate. Too.
Right.
I mean, it's a worthy comparison, but not one that really defends him.
No, it's one that incriminates him. And it's also not true that Donald Trump won the presidency on his first try. He ran in the year 2000 on the Reform Party. I'm actually having a hard time finding anything in these tweets that's true. Imagine for a moment what would have happened if President Obama had tweeted about being of sound mind. Guys, really, I'm not demented, I'm smart. It would have been wall-to-wall, 24/7, immediate calls for resignation and impeachment from the right. And Sarah Huckabee Sanders is now, I don't know if I can call it on the defensive, but she's panicking. And once again, when the president of the United States is defending his mental stability, that's bad. When the focus in interviewing a press secretary becomes the president's own defenses of his mental stability, that's really bad. And she went on Fox and Friends over the weekend and said, what's really mentally unstable is people that don't see the positive impact that this president is having on the country. Tell me more, Sarah. I'd love to hear more about that. How is no one controlling Trump? Right? It's clear now that no one apparently can control the guy because this is completely self-destructive. And Trump may be sort of some combination of delusional and narcissistic in that he might think, hey, if I just start tweeting about how smart and stable I am, I'll convince people, instead of realizing that it actually makes him seem even less credible, because these tweets, along with everything else, are really starting to put pressure on Congress as well as on Donald Trump's cabinet in the context of the 25th Amendment to really put aside political positions, put aside Trump's lack of political experience, put all of that stuff aside. Just based on cognitive ability, it's unclear that this man is fit to be president of the United States.
Yeah, and this is the sort of thing that you can kind of just brush under the rug. You don't have to defend yourself really from these allegations, because as president, you can pick and choose your battles, and no matter how you choose to defend yourself against allegations that you're unstable, it's not going to look well.
No, anytime you start saying I'm really smart and stable and there's nothing to see here, it only calls more attention to it. Okay, now, this is not a fake story. We are in the real world here. Because of mounting claims that Donald Trump is not cognitively competent and not fit to serve as president of the United States, because more and more evidence is out there that Donald Trump may be in the early stages of dementia, Donald Trump has now agreed to undergo a medical exam at Walter Reed Medical Center to, I guess, try to put these allegations to rest. And the claims include everything from Trump doesn't recognize people he's known for decades, to Trump often is repeating the exact same stories word for word, as if he doesn't even remember having told that story. Now, these can also be signs of complete and total narcissism, right? But let's put that aside because there's a lot more that's being added to the story. The problem with this little medical test stunt is that the entire thing is completely and totally bogus, and I'm going to tell you why, right? So as the story goes, as told by Trump, he's going to go to Walter Reed Medical Center in Washington, D.C. this Friday. He's going to be fully and thoroughly examined by the same doctor who examined President Obama. It's not going to be Jacob Bornstein or whatever the guy's name was, who said, Harold Bornstein, who said, oh, Jacob was his son, who said, oh, this is the fittest president ever to serve or whatever. It'll be the same guy who looked at Obama. And again, it's going to happen this week. This will be a 2-hour test, we are told, which, according to medical experts, normally would include urine and blood tests, cardiac checks, including Trump's heart, as well as questions to Trump about his sleeping habits and his sex life. And then Trump's going to make the results public, and we will finally know the truth about Donald Trump's cognitive state and his fitness to serve, right? Well, no, not really. It's up to Trump to choose what gets released from this test, from this examination. It's not the hospital that's going to release the results. Trump will get it, and his office will put together a summary, likely that means bullet points, of whatever Trump and his White House staffers decide they are going to publish. So right off the bat, let's just imagine for a second, Trump does this test and the exam turns up that something is up with Trump's fitness to serve or cognitive ability, and it doesn't have to be released because Trump's going to pick and choose what it is that he tells us. But the bigger issue is that the concern here is over cognitive issues, not physical. Mostly this exam on Friday is going to be about physical issues, which gets us to the real question. Can cognitive decline be measured empirically, objectively, in a structured 2-hour, mostly physical exam centered around things like blood testing and heart health. But David, you might say, he's going to be asked questions about his sleep habits and his sex life. That's not really going to expose early signs of dementia. You need a full psychiatric evaluation. This is a checkup. This is about Trump's prostate and his cholesterol, and the sexual questions are more than likely to connect whether his sex life is safe given his heart health and that type of thing. Even the neurological testing that President Obama's test included when he had it done by the same doctor, it looks at reflexes, looks at pupil dilation. It doesn't look at cognitive decline. I spend time regularly with elderly folks who have moderately advanced cases of Alzheimer's. And even with them, if the person is relatively clever, you've got to spend a lot of time and talk about really deep issues to realize something is wrong, because they know how to appear to be more or less with it in short conversations. And this is especially true because narcissists and manipulative people, people like Trump, they know how to appear to be smart and super impressive. That's what Trump has done in order to get tens of millions of people to vote for him in the first place. So if you think that asking Trump about his sleeping habits is going to expose dementia, if it's even there, absolutely not. So this is a total scam. It's a setup to exonerate Trump and present his defenders with something that they can point to and say, no, look, he went and he saw a doctor and he's fine. But this is a physical exam that is going to be used to claim that Trump is cognitively with it. This is an exam that will not be proof one way or the other. It's the wrong type of exam, and people are going to fall for it. And that's why I'm concerned about it, Pat, because even though this is not actually going to measure what it is that Trump is trying to argue he's fine on, his followers will see this and they'll say, look, he's totally fine. Nothing to worry about.
I'm sure that summary will be fantastic, right?
It's going to be great.
That they pick out will show that he's the most healthy president of all time.
No doubt.
And his followers will run with it. We may ask for the long form version of it.
Not
going
to get it. Oh, no, they're not going to get it. We'll get the long form version of this exam as soon as we get the long form version of Donald Trump's tax returns, right? That it's just not going to happen. And it is, you need to know in advance that it is a total sham. Send me your thoughts. I'm on Twitter at dpacman. The show is on Twitter at David Pakman Show. We'll take a break and be back with so much more right after this.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
Today's new member of the day is Sean Hurt. Sean, thank you for being a David Pakman Show member. Really appreciate everybody who has signed up in this as yet very, very young 2018. You can join Sean at davidpakman.com/membership. You can also make a pledge of as little as $1 a month through Patreon at patreon.com/David Pakman Show. And once we hit I think it's 2,150 patrons. That's the new goal, right? We will release our 12 to 15 part critical thinking mini-series. So very, very exciting things. Let me follow up on something from last week. Last week, I told you that this longtime supporter of the program, dating all the way back to at minimum 2015, but I think maybe even 2014, who has sponsored discounted memberships before, to kick off 2018 bigly, he sent in a contribution which allowed us to offer 33 half-price yearly memberships. In other words, he already paid for half of 33 memberships. He paid $30 per membership, meaning that there were 33 memberships available for just $30 to you, to the first 33 people who wanted one of these memberships. We have 4 of these left, okay? So the way this works is if you want one of these 4 remaining memberships, you email in, and then I will send you a coupon code, which you can use at davidpakman.com/membership. And when you go to the website and sign up, you select the $60 a year membership, and the coupon code will drop the price to only $30 per year. We had 33 of these available. 29 have been spoken for, 4 remain. What do you get with one of these memberships? You get the bonus show. It's an extra show every day. You get the commercial-free audio stream of the entire show. You get the commercial-free video stream of the entire show. No waiting for individual YouTube clips to publish. All you've got to do is email me. And please don't assume that because there's only 4 left, you won't have the time to get one. Because if everybody does that, we'll end up with 4 memberships just hanging around. Someone's going to get them, and why couldn't it be you?
Yeah, it takes me a while to come up with aliases with which I can sign up for membership.
If you do it quickly, like within the next 24 hours, you'll probably beat out Pat's fake names trying to get cheap memberships. But seriously, go to davidpakman.com, click on contact, and say, hey, David, I'd love one of those half-price memberships, and I will get you the coupon code. Okay, it's always a bummer when I do this, but I know people like hearing it, so I will do another one of these segments. I've mentioned before that sometimes people will cancel memberships or pull Patreon funding for reasons that I find really, really depressing. And for example, there was one a few months ago where someone said, David, I love what you do. I agree with you politically. I think you're providing an extraordinarily important public service, but I am married with kids, and I am not going to support your bachelor lifestyle. If you were married with kids, I would contribute to the program, which was a bummer for me because I would like, the way I decide what to support is on the merits of what I'm supporting rather than the circumstances, right? If there's a movie I want to see, I could say, I'm not going to go and support those wealthy actors. They don't need my money. Well, hold on. If they've made a movie that I believe is worthwhile, then I will go and pay the $8, or as it is in Boston, $16 or $17 to see that film, right? So that was really a bummer to me. And sadly, the New Year's break that we took led to a huge influx of further cancellations from people, some of which I think you'll find interesting, but to me are actually kind of concerning. A couple people canceled because they could tell from my Twitter feed that I wasn't paying attention to the political news during the vacation. Really, I'm not allowed to tune out for just a few days. I need to, even during vacation, I have to pay attention to the political news. That's not good. That's not a way to prevent burnout.
Yeah, you have to refresh and rejuvenate.
Absolutely.
So you can come back in 2018 ready to go.
The other trend from a couple people was that we are taking vacation. That's the complaint. That was the complaint, right? Like, David, I'm pulling my money because a couple people did this, and it's so sad because you're taking more vacations than most people in the U.S. get at their jobs, and you're even taking off federal holidays. And really, if you're independent media that's viewer-supported, you should really be working through all that to make as much money as possible. It's so sad because I've been saying for a decade on the program, we've got a problem with work culture in the United States. I believe more in the Scandinavian and European model where it's really important to take vacation. And what basically these people were saying is I should be a hypocrite. I should go on the show and tell you I support employers giving staff more vacation. We don't get enough, but then I should try to force my staff to work through vacations and federal holidays. How does that make any sense?
And then provided that we're going to take vacations from time to time, the end of the year is the time to do it because very few people are working too.
Whenever we do work through those periods, viewership goes way down because
way
fewer people are paying attention to the show.
With their families, their friends, hanging out.
It's really sad and it's disappointing. And you know what? The good thing is that most people in the audience aren't supporting us with all of these conditions, right? They're saying, hey, I believe in what you're doing and I trust that you know when you should do the show and that you'll do what makes most sense for the show with the contributions that we send. But it really was kind of sad. And it always happens. There's always some percentage, you know, but I actually wrote back because one guy was polite in his criticism. I said, listen, I don't think contributing is right for you because we're not going to stop taking the vacations and we're not going to stop taking the federal holidays off. I think it's really important. It's important to prevent burnout. It's important because this is the philosophy I'm advocating on the show. And I would be a two-faced hypocrite if I said one thing and then I did the other in terms of staff time. So listen, we're doing what we're doing. I think most people are okay with it. And I appreciate the sustaining members that have been with us for years and years and years and don't have these micro expectations of how we're going to manage everything from vacation time to scheduling of holidays.
Yeah, we can't have a few people just take hostage of how we do things here.
Absolutely.
And that's exactly why you're not considering getting married and having kids just to please that one viewer.
That's exactly right. There was that one viewer who said, if I got married and had kids, then his money would flow in. Not going to be bullied that way. It's just not going to happen. Okay, tons of emails and comments flooding in about Donald Trump advisor Stephen Miller's appearance yesterday on Jake Tapper's Sunday morning program. The comments were mostly, one, he didn't make any sense in what he was saying. And number two, he didn't make any sense in how he was saying it, weirdly slurring his speech and twitching in kind of a weird way. There was actually a Reddit post about this. where a user said in the Jake Tapper interview this morning, every minute or so, he had this odd twitch on, I think, his right side. I'm curious if he's okay, or maybe he has a coke problem. I'm going to play some pieces of this interview for you. The slurring is, I don't know about the drug usage stuff. The slurring is more of a downer thing, not upper, but he does have a weird twitch, but I think he's always had that. It might be sort of like anxiety being on camera or something.
He
I
did
don't know.
repeat an anecdote at one point, though. That's the only reason I'm suspicious about that sort of thing.
He repeated it at least one time. Yeah, that was weird. It's an absolutely ridiculous interview. Let's start playing a little bit of it here. If you're watching, check out the weird movements. If you're listening, you might hear the weird speech pattern.
A phenomenon was happening that you didn't see, a phenomenon was happening that the rest of the political class didn't see. All these so-called political geniuses in Washington, whether it be at the big lobbying firms or
the only
many
person
of the
who's called himself a genius
Congress,
in the last week is the president. But
which happens to be a true statement.
Okay.
A self-made billionaire who revolutionized reality TV and who has changed the course of our politics.
He's watching and he's happy that you said that. But
you know, Jake, you can be condescending.
I'm not being condescending. I'm trying to get to the point that Steve Bannon.
You can be condescending. That was a snide remark. You're sure he's watching and he's happy. Let me tell you something.
Why is
your
that snide?
network? You can be as condescending as you want. It's part of your MO.
A lot of the entire thing was like this. Basically, Stephen Miller not allowing Jake Tapper to even get a question out and just criticizing Jake Tapper's demeanor during the interview. Let's watch just another example of this interview, and it just gets worse and worse.
But listen, you can have 24/7.
I have no idea why you're attacking me.
Well, I'll explain to you.
My point
I'll
is,
tell you why I'm attacking you.
Steve Bannon,
Jake, you can have a 24/7.
Help push the president's travel ban.
He helped
pull out.
I'm so glad you brought that up, because that's one of the fake news items in the book.
Stephen,
I would happen to know better than you would, Jake, about how the travel ban was written. Steve Bannon didn't push the travel ban.
If you would let me,
Steve Bannon wasn't right.
If you let me ask this
No,
question.
because you get 24 hours of negative anti-Trump hysterical coverage on this network that led in recent weeks to some spectacularly embarrassing false reporting.
I think the
from your
viewers
network
right now can ascertain who's being hysterical.
The viewers are entitled to have 3 months of the truth. Why don't you just give me 3 minutes to tell you the truth about Donald Trump that I know?
Yeah, the real Donald Trump that Stephen Miller knows, my guess, is like the Donald Trump that nearly 200 people described in Michael Wolff's book Fire and Fury, but somehow I don't think that's the real Donald Trump that Stephen Miller wanted to talk about. Anyway, this next part is great. Jake Tapper tries to use the voice that a preschool teacher uses when a 4-year-old is a little rambunctious and won't sit still. Jake Tapper actually uses that voice on Stephen Miller, and the craziest part is it almost kind of works.
Because it's my show and I don't want to do that. So here's my question.
No, but this isn't a courtroom, and I have a right to speak.
Settle down. Calm down.
Jake.
I have a question for you about issues. Stephen Bannon, who the president says had nothing to do with his presidency, he was part of the president's travel ban. He was part of pulling out of the Paris climate deal. He was part of withdrawing from the TPP. He's part of border security. He's part of being tough on immigration.
So you want to go through the list?
No, I don't want to go through. But my point is it really the position of the Trump White House that Steve Bannon had nothing to do with the presidency? Or can you acknowledge the reality that he was a key player?
I think that what the point is that his role has been greatly exaggerated, whereas the president hasn't gotten the due that he deserves for the movement that he put together to tap into the kinds of people whose life concerns don't get a lot of attention on CNN.
That is the way you act if you are scared S-less about what Trump is going to do if you don't do his bidding the right way. And we saw what happened to Sean Spicer when he didn't do Trump's bidding the right way. Jake Tapper did actually try to get to some real questions. Here's one about the Russia contacts between Trump personally and Russians. Not surprisingly, no answer from Stephen Miller.
And he said that, quote, the chance that Don Jr. did not walk these Jamos up to his father's office on the 26th floor is 0. Did President Trump meet with any of the so-called Jamos who were in that Trump Tower meeting?
Steve Bannon's eloquence in that description notwithstanding, it's tragic and unfortunate that Steve would make these grotesque comments so out of touch with reality and obviously so vindictive. And the whole White House staff is deeply disappointed in it.
Because it just goes on like that for 90 seconds, and I don't want to subject people to it. And Jake Tapper does try once more to get an answer from him on that question and still doesn't.
So you were at the campaign during that Trump Tower meeting, I believe, right, in the summer of 2016. Just to answer the question, because you were there and Steve Bannon was not, did any of those people from that meeting meet with President Trump? As Bannon says, the chance that Don Jr. didn't walk these Jamos up to his father's office on the 26th floor is 0. Can you just settle that for us? Did President Trump meet with any of the people?
I have no knowledge of anything to do with that meeting.
Okay.
But what I can tell you unequivocally is that the allegations and insinuations in this book, which are a pure work of fiction.
Right. He has no knowledge one way or the other, but he knows that what Michael Wolff said about the meeting is a lie. How is that possible?
Yeah, that part was just weird visually.
It's very
too,
strange. Very, very strange. And eventually Jake Tapper had to cut him off because Miller just wouldn't stop filibustering and kicked him off the show.
Those voices, those experiences don't get covered on this network. That's why, to prove the point, I was booked to talk about the very issues I'm just describing, and you're not even asking about them because they're not interesting facts to you.
That's not true. I have plenty of questions on immigration. You've attempted to filibuster by talking about your flights with the president. I want to ask you a question because
don't be condescending, Jake.
Stephen,
Jake,
the president and the White House.
The reason why I want to talk about
the president and the White House.
The reason why I want to talk about the president's experiences, what I've seen with him traveling to meet dozens of foreign leaders, with his incredible work.
Okay, you're not answering the questions.
No,
I understand.
You have 24 hours a day of anti-Trump material. You're not going to give 3 minutes for the American people to hear the real experience of Donald Trump.
There's one viewer that you care about right now, and you're being obsequious. You're being a factotum in order to please him. Okay.
No.
And I think I've wasted enough of my viewers' time. Thank you, Stephen. As Republicans, lawmakers call for Attorney General Jeff Sessions to resign in a major reversal.
It's almost like Miller didn't understand this was a question and answer format where Jake Tapper asks questions and he answers them. Miller ended up being escorted off the set. This was like two sources close to the situation said that after the taping was done, Miller was asked to leave several times and he wouldn't leave, and eventually security was called and he was escorted out. Sometimes I wonder what the future holds for people like Stephen Miller once Trump is gone.
Well, yeah, and Donald Trump obviously watched this too.
Obviously, he tweeted right away, yeah.
Yeah, saying that Stephen Miller destroyed Jake Tapper on CNN. So this audience of one thing held up.
It was absolutely true, and not exactly the way I saw it. We'll take a break. Back with Bill Scher after this.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. Welcome back to the David Pakman Show.
It's great to welcome back to the program Bill Scher, who is contributing editor to Politico Magazine. Bill has caught the ire, actually, of some in our audience, but we'll maybe get to that later, or maybe it'll just sort of surface naturally during the conversation. Bill, so let's talk a little bit about midterm strategy. We're now about 10 months away from the November 6th midterm elections. There are a lot of different lines of interest in these particular midterms, specifically because of Donald Trump as president of the U.S. Generally speaking, what's your outlook on these midterms for the left?
Well, the outlook is very good. Almost in most special elections in 2017, the ones that have been more nationally well known, like the Doug Jones race in Alabama, or the John Ossoff race in Georgia, as well as further down ballot, state and local races. Democratic turnout has been above the baseline, and Republican turnout has been below the baseline. So even in races where Republicans won, like that Georgia race with John Ossoff, the Democratic decline from 2006 was much less than what you saw on the Republican side. So if that pattern holds in 2018, when the races are going to be even, the House map, I mean, none of the maps are super favorable to Democrats, mind you, but if you have a similar pattern of weak Republican turnout and strong Democratic turnout, it should be a very good year.
Yeah, so in terms of patterns, I mean, when we talk about midterms, during the first midterm for a president, so to speak, the sort of rule of thumb is it's good for the party, not in the White House. In 2002, for George W. Bush, post 9/11, that was an exception to that rule. But generally speaking, that's a bit of conventional wisdom. Turnout is also typically significantly lower for these midterms than in presidential elections. Is there something in particular, other than just the craziness sort of caused by the Trump era, that you think might reverse some of those trends or exacerbate them in 2018?
Well, it's typical for the out party to have good midterms. The in party, the party in power, has to govern. Governing requires trade-offs that tend to depress some element of the governing party's base, and the out party is just mad at whatever the in party is doing, and so they're energized. So Obama had 2 terrible midterms. I'd say it's somewhat typical for there to be some kind of mitigating factor in one of your 2 midterms. So for George Bush, as you said, 2002 was pretty good for Republicans. That was post 9/11. By 2006, the wear and tear of being the party in power finally caught up with the Republicans, and Democrats had a wave year that brought Nancy Pelosi into the speaker's chair. In 1994, Bill Clinton had a terrible first 2 years. He couldn't get a stimulus passed. He passed a tax increase that was a backtrack from his middle-class tax cut pledge. Hillary Care was a disaster. The crime bill was very unpopular. Terrible 1994. Newt Gingrich becomes speaker. 1998, there's impeachment, and there's a pro-Clinton backlash to the impeachment. That's a pretty good midterm year for Democrats. So so far this year, there's no mitigating circumstance that's going to help Trump and the Republicans stave off a bad midterm so far. Maybe something happens between now and November that I can't foresee. But Trump's approval has been so bad for so long. Very little seems to actually move the needle. He bounces between mid 30s and low 40s. Anything within that range is theoretically bad for Republicans writ large. So it'd have to be something pretty dramatic to help Republicans avoid a bad midterm year.
Okay, so then now let's get more into the micro of the strategy with the different types of races that Democrats might find themselves facing. And I think this is where I'm seeing posts on our subreddit from people very, very displeased with Bill Scher, as the staff here knows. There have been a couple different movements that have cropped up over the last couple of years, Bill, as I know you know, that have a focus not on flipping red seats blue, but on primarying anybody within the Democratic Party that is identified as not to the left enough. And my general view has been that's a great idea, but let's be cautious and sort of prudent with that strategy, because that's a strategy that in some cases, in a world with limited resources that one can spend on any one election, it could end up actually turning some blue seats red. So let me just first say only that and turn it over to you. What's your sense of these movements that seem to be pushing, in some cases, the primarying of Democrats that they don't see as to the left enough at the possible risk of giving Republicans a win?
Well, let me be clear, because I feel like I write a lot of things on this subject that get twisted around on the intertubes. I've never argued that Democrats should only run right-leaning candidates.
Sure.
I wrote a piece called Urge to Purge that was critical of the decision to have a left-wing challenge to Dianne Feinstein in California as a distraction of resources. Now, it's very possible that Kevin DeLeon, who's the main guy who's running against Feinstein, he could win. I'm not saying he can't win. And there's another piece I wrote after Doug Jones won Alabama, which is maybe this is a time for a generic Democrat to face off against Donald Trump in 2020. And that got twisted around to saying Bill Scher wants centrist or center-right candidates. That's not generic. That's taking a more distinctive ideological path, which Doug Jones did not do. Doug Jones didn't run as an anti-abortion Democrat or a diehard pro-gun Democrat. And even that article wasn't an argument for what Democrats should do up and down the ballot. That was what's going to make sense to match up with Donald Trump in 2020, and that's it. Not a template for the party forevermore. So I think you got to be very specific in what kind of race you're talking about here.
Right.
It may well be that if you ran an army of progressive populist candidates across the country in 2018, that they would do very well. But it's also possible you can run a bunch of bland, flavorless candidates in 2018, and they might do very well also. And you're not going to have that kind of simple control where you do one thing one time and you assess it. There's probably going to be a mix of candidates in 2018. And maybe we'll be able to tease out better who has the edge in this ideological battle for 2020, which I think is going to get played out in the presidential primary no matter what. But if you are, like I assume many of your audience, in believing fervently that a progressive populist, Bernie-crat, Democratic socialist candidate is the only way to win races in red-leaning areas. I think there are some contrary data points from 2017. Rob Quist ran as a Bernie-crat in Montana and lost, although did better than the previous House candidate that year. But Steve Bullock is the governor of Montana, and he won in 2016, and he is not a Bernie-crat. He's much more of a moderate.
Yeah, and I think that's why, my approach has been, and it sounds like it's similar to what you're saying, although maybe worded differently, which is you have to understand the context. And often the one that comes up is Joe Manchin, right? Joe Manchin in West Virginia, really, really popular, understandably popular to bash him as arguably the most right-leaning Democratic senator, period. And I've pointed out that you don't have unlimited resources. And so if you want to challenge, if you want to primary Manchin, you might end up blowing a bunch of money and Manchin still wins the primary. You might win the primary against Manchin, and then you end up turning that seat over to a real right-wing Republican, which there's no shortage of in West Virginia to begin with. Maybe that money is better spent trying to flip a couple of congressional seats or something like that. And some people understand that pragmatic approach, and some people just get furious with me about it.
Well, the Manchin, there is a primary challenger to Manchin. There's and I don't think that person gave very much attention. So it hasn't been an actual resource drain. And I think the argument that a left-wing candidate is poised to win in West Virginia, if only given the chance, I don't really see a lot of evidence for that based on what has happened in West Virginia over the past several decades.
Yeah.
Now, you look at and you look at look what happened in the red areas in 2017. Some people say, well, Zephyr Teachout in 2016 didn't win in upstate New York because Hillary was a drag on the ticket. And Russ Feingold couldn't win in Wisconsin because Hillary was a drag on the ticket. Well, that's not true for Steve Bullock. Steve Bullock won in Montana anyway, and Rob Quist couldn't when Hillary was not on the ticket.
Yeah.
Doug Jones, again, not a right-wing Democrat, but not a left-wing Democrat either. And yes, he ran against the pedophile in Alabama. I'm not saying that's not an important data point to look at here. But he was able to energize. He kept that Democratic base revved, not so much because of him, because the other guy was so bad. I mean, the argument against running bland, flavorless candidates is that's not good enough, no matter how bad your opponent is. Hillary couldn't beat Donald Trump. Well, Doug Jones did beat Roy Moore. So depending on your candidate, your opposing candidate, maybe that is going to be good enough. And maybe being a single payer candidate in a red state is not magic to winning over Trump voters. Maybe there's going to be examples that disprove that. I mean,
Sure.
Not everything is going to be cut and dry. But we haven't seen evidence in 2017 that the Bernie-crat model is somehow impervious to Republican assault. So we're going to have more test cases in 2018 to look at.
Last thing I want to touch on, the tax plan, okay? I am very, very worried that Trump and his cronies will successfully sell the fact that a tax plan was done rather than exactly how it will affect voters as a success, as a campaign promise done, and that it will be tough for Democrats to actually argue against that, not because the facts aren't with them, but because the optics of it are going to be favorable to Republicans. What do you think?
I think both parties, I think the Republicans are overselling the tax bill and Democrats are underselling the tax bill insofar as the political landscape is concerned for 2018. When Republicans are saying, Trump literally said, this is a massive Christmas gift for you. And that's not really true. It has uneven impact across the country, depending on your income bracket and how you itemize and all that sort of thing. It's not like a Bush-style tax cut. If you remember from the Bush years, everybody got a $300 check, or most people got a $300 check.
Right.
And Democrats would say, this is crumbs. The top 1% are getting tens of thousands of dollars, and you're just getting this piddly little check. And the response was, you are being really condescending to the working men and women of this country who appreciate that $300. So stop being so dismissive of the amount. And that was a winning political counterattack to Democrats in 2004. Now, the Obama years had its own tax called the Making Work Pay tax credit, which wasn't a standalone check. It was simply, your withholding was not as much was taken out of your paycheck week to week. And the Obama economist said that's actually going to be better for the economy. It'll be more stimulative. If people get a check, they stick in the bank and they don't spend it. If it's a little bit every week, they're more likely to spend it. That'll have a collective Keynesian effect on the economy. This tax cut is like Obama's tax cut in that respect.
Yes, immediate, effective, I believe, February 1st. The new tax brackets go into play, and people who would be saving money would immediately see more money in their paychecks.
Of varying amounts. Not everyone's going to get the same thing.
Yep.
So there's going to be a subtle difference in people's paychecks this year, which people may or may not notice. And they also have to wonder what's going to happen when I actually do my tax returns in April of 2019, which isn't going to happen before the midterms. Maybe my itemizations aren't going to work out in my favor,
right,
depending on what has transpired in other parts of the tax cut. What happens with my health insurance premiums now that the individual mandate has been nullified? Although technically not nullified until 2019, but do health insurance companies jack up their premiums in advance? That we don't know. Mm-hmm. What do states and cities do in response to this? Are there property tax increases that are going to occur? People don't distinguish between tax cuts. They look at their net on November 2018. What is my overall cost of living as a result of Trump's policies? Total hypothetical. Let's say Trump pulls out of NAFTA between now and then. Does that cause a price shock at the grocery store? You're not going to say, thanks for my $20 on my withholding, but now my grocery bill is 20% higher. You haven't really helped me out very much. There's so many uncertainties here that I don't think we know. That's dangerous for Republicans. Democrats are starting to oversimplify the case and say this is a tax cut for the wealthy and a tax increase for the middle class. That's only true. I mean, there's individual examples immediately, again, depending on your circumstance. But the larger case is the individual tax cuts expire in 2025 for individuals and not for corporations.
Right.
Nobody cares about 2025 and 2018. The tax code's going to change probably multiple times between now and then. People want to know, what is their deal now? What has Trump delivered for me today? And if you're telling people you're going to get a tax increase and they don't right away, then you're the person who's overshot.
Wow. Bill Scher, you've said it all, contributing editor to Politico Magazine. We'll keep checking in with you as we close in on November 6th. Thanks as always.
Always a pleasure.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
Lawyers for Donald Trump have started talking with Robert Mueller's special investigation staff about what a Trump interview with his investigators might look like. And this is because Trump's lawyers are probably correctly guessing that eventually Mueller's investigation is going to get to Trump personally, since how could it not? Since Trump is clearly being investigated personally. And on the table, and we know why, is the idea that instead of an in-person interview with Mueller's team, that Donald Trump would participate by writing written responses to Robert Mueller rather than actually having to go in there and sit down in a live interview. I wonder why Donald Trump's attorneys would prefer that he just submit written answers to Robert Mueller. Another part of the discussion is whether Trump would be interviewed, if there was to be an interview, directly by Robert Mueller or by some of his staff. And more than likely, it seems that it would be Mueller's staff, not Mueller personally. And they're, of course, also examining whether the president can even be interviewed in these investigations. There are multiple sources that say that what Trump's lawyers are really looking for is some kind of legal justification to say you can't actually interview the president himself because it would cause some kind of conflict or problem or security issue. This is not actually a new conversation for Trump's lawyers internally. Back when Paul Manafort was indicted, Trump's legal team, his personal legal team, started strategizing and talking about how can we keep Mueller away from Trump here? But we're getting closer and closer to the time when it's just going to be time for Trump to go in there and talk to them. And that's when it really starts to get funny. A second person familiar with what Trump's lawyers are proposing or thinking about says that Trump's lawyers have the idea that maybe it would be acceptable for Trump to skip the written question and answers, for Trump to skip the in-person interview, and just to write an affidavit where he says, I did nothing wrong and didn't collude with Russia, and that would be it. Yeah, because that would be a really trustworthy piece of paper, right? What do analysts think? They basically think that Donald Trump, if he is thought to be involved, you've got to bring him in personally. The affidavit is BS, and that it would be very unlikely that Robert Mueller's team would agree to just written questions and answers. You got to get him in there. You got to get him in the chair, and you've got to talk to him. I don't know whether Trump's lawyers really think that maybe I didn't do anything wrong on a piece of paper would suffice, or just written question and answers. It's not clear. But the concern, if you're Trump's lawyer, is that you have to realize within 5 minutes of sitting down with Mueller's team, Trump's going to incriminate himself, even if he's not guilty of anything. That's just how Trump is. He finds ways to create new problems for himself, and that's how we have the Russia investigation that we even have today. I was trying to think, is there any way that we might be able to convince Trump that this is a good idea? If you went to Trump and you said, listen, we want to film your meeting with Robert Mueller, and we're going to make it a pay-per-view event, and you're going to get just gigantic ratings on TV, and we'll give you 80% of the pay-per-view revenue. Maybe then Trump would say, I'm going to do it because my interview with Robert Mueller is going to beat all prior records for any interviews with Robert Mueller in history, and I'm going to make the big bucks, and it's going to be absolutely huge. I don't know, but I think everybody who's working for Trump realizes that this would be an absolute and total disaster for Trump to go into that room. Let's talk about what's going on with Comcast. I think we do have time for the story, Pat. Let's go to it. Let's do the Comcast story. Many companies were honest in the lead up to the Trump tax bill. They admitted, we're not going to hire people because of the Trump tax cuts. And that makes sense. That's how hiring works. You hire when there's more demand for your product or service. Anyway, Trump and some of his cronies have been saying, hey, the tax cuts worked because right when the bill passed, this company or that company said, we're going to be hiring. And of course, that hiring was more than likely already planned ahead of time based on demand for the product or service of the company. But that's okay. Trump still decided to tout it as a win for his tax plan. It turns out we've now learned that Comcast fired 500 people right before Christmas, despite claiming that the tax cut plan was going to lead to the creation of thousands of jobs if they got that corporate tax cut. Because of the obvious hypocrisy that is illuminated here, Comcast did everything they could to keep the firing secret. They even forced the fired employees to sign a non-disclosure agreement if they wanted to get their severance pay. Ars Technica asked Comcast, if you were planning to create thousands of jobs with the tax cut that was days from its passage, why would you need to fire 500 people as the tax cut was passing? And Comcast provided the following statement where they said, periodically, we reorganize groups of employees and adjust our sales tactics and talent. This change in the central division is an example of this practice and occurred in the context of our adding hundreds of frontline and sales employees. All these employees were offered generous severance and an opportunity to apply for other jobs at Comcast. What Comcast then did is very slick. These firings happened on December 15th. And then on December 20th, they announced that because of the tax cuts and the net neutrality repeal, they would be giving a $1,000 bonus to more than 100,000 employees. Plus, they'd be investing $50 billion in infrastructure. And they said, with these investments, we expect to add thousands of new and indirect jobs. It turns out, as usual, that this is complete and utter BS. Comcast has been making investments of this size already during net neutrality, during the Obama White House. The announcement is merely, we're going to keep doing the exact same thing we were doing anyway, because if you're Comcast, you need infrastructure. You need to constantly invest in your infrastructure to make money, to serve your business. So what's really at issue here is automation. Comcast said that the firings are getting rid of a lot of salespeople who were walking around neighborhoods and going to apartment complexes to try to sell Comcast services, and that what's happening is that a new direct sales system is being put in place. It will require fewer humans, and that's why they got rid of these people. So this, in the end, is just like when Trump saved those 1,000 jobs at Carrier in Indiana, and the CEO or the VP said something like, oh, that's great, yeah, we'll use the money from the tax cut, the tax credit, to restructure our factory to eventually move in the direction of automation. I don't really blame the companies. These are publicly traded companies in a system that rewards one thing: stock price increases. Obviously, what they're going to do when Trump comes to them and says, hey, we're not generating any more demand for your product, but we're going to lower the rate at which you can take profits. Great opportunity to start doing more automation and replacing people with machines or people with even fewer people. This is economy-wide. And what it proves to us is that tax policy needs to take into account the realities of the economy. You're not going to get companies to hire with a tax cut now. You weren't going to get companies to hire with a tax cut before, but what you are going to see is more and more companies choosing to automate with any extra money that they have, which over the long term is actually going to increase unemployment. Another big victory for Trump. That is it for today. No voicemail. Great bonus show coming up. Thanks for joining me.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.